All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
Megan, waitress. The silence was the first thing that registered. Not a peaceful silence, not the gentle, snowy hush of a Christmas morning that should have been. This was a predatory silence, a void that had swallowed all the familiar sounds of my life. The soft hum of the refrigerator had ceased. The distant tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, a wedding gift from my grandmother, was absent. Even the usual creaks and groans of our old house, the ones I knew like the cadence of my own breathing, had been stifled. It was 7:03 a.m. on December 25th, and the world had gone mute. My body knew before my mind did. A cold dread, separate from the chill in the air, began to seep into my bones. I was alone in our bed. The space beside me was cold, the sheets thrown back in a gesture that spoke not of an early riser making coffee, but of a frantic escape. "Daniel," I called out, my voice a fragile thing in the overwhelming quiet. No answer. I swung my legs out of bed, the worn floorboards icy under my bare feet. I pulled on my robe, the one he'd given me last Christmas, and wrapped it tight, a futile gesture against the cold that was coming from inside. I moved through the house like a ghost haunting its own life. The living room was pristine, the tree we'd decorated together twinkling merrily, a cruel, colorful mockery. The stockings hung limp and empty. No presents had been magically arranged overnight, no note on the tree. A frantic, illogical hope made me check the garage. His car was gone. Of course it was gone. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Maybe he'd gone for last-minute eggnog? At 7 a.m. on Christmas? The lie was so flimsy it shattered against the hard surface of reality. Then I remembered. The envelope. A week ago, a table of 4 businessmen had come in just before closing. They were celebrating a big deal, loud, boisterous, and incredibly generous. They'd left me a tip, a single, crisp $1,000 bill folded inside a thank you note. For the best service in Alaska, the note had said. It felt like a miracle. A seed. I'd hidden it in my old copy of To Kill a Mockingbird on my nightstand, a temporary hiding place until I could open a separate savings account on Monday. It was going to be the start of my escape fund from the endless cycle of bills and his quiet resentment. My secret. Our secret was the dog, Bailey, our loyal Labrador, who was now whining softly at the back door, needing to be let out. I ran back to the bedroom, my breath catching in my throat. The book was there. But when I snatched it up, it was too light. I fumbled it open. The hollowed-out pages I'd made as a teenager were empty. The bill was gone. The note was gone. The world tilted on its axis. The air left my lungs in a whoosh. I stumbled back, hitting the wall, the impact jarring but feeling distant, secondary to the seismic shock tearing through me. $1,000. Gone, Daniel, gone. The pieces clicked together with a horrifying, metallic finality. The late nights. The new, secretive password on his phone. The female colleague he'd mentioned a few times too often, with a little too much defensiveness in his voice. The way he'd flinched last week when I'd touched his shoulder while he was texting. I dismissed it as stress. I was a fool. He hadn't just left me. He had robbed me. He had taken my hope, my little shred of a miracle, and used it as fuel for his escape with another woman. On Christmas morning, a sound ripped from my throat, a raw, guttural thing that was part sob, part scream of pure, undiluted rage. It echoed in the silent, mocking house. Bailey came skittering back in, pressing his warm, worried body against my legs, a lone anchor in the shattering of my universe. I slid down the wall to the floor, the cold of the wood seeping through my robe. I wrapped my arms around Bailey, burying my face in his fur, and I cried. But they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of incineration. The Megan who believed in Christmas miracles, who believed in the sanctity of a shared home, who believed in the man she'd married 11 years ago, that Megan was burning to ash on the floor of her hallway. When the tears finally subsided, a terrifying calm descended. The silence was no longer predatory. It was expectant. It was waiting for me to speak. I looked up, my gaze sweeping over the empty, decorated house, the symbol of a life that was now a lie. My voice, when it came, was low, steady, and colder than the Alaskan snow outside. He took the money, I whispered to the dog, to the house, to the ghost of my former self. But he made a mistake. He left me with nothing. And when you have nothing, You have nothing left to lose. This wasn't an ending. This was a detonation. And from the rubble, I would build something he would never, ever be able to touch. The ghost of Christmas morning lingered in every room, a pervasive scent of pine needles and betrayal. For 3 days, I moved through the house like an automaton. I called the diner, my voice a hollow monotone, and quit. Family emergency, I said, the lie tasting like ash. Bailey was my only confidant, his warm, solid presence the one thing that kept me grounded in a reality that had become fluid and cruel. The silence was no longer expectant, it was accusatory. The walls seemed to whisper his name, to replay the memories of 1,000 ordinary mornings that now felt like a meticulously constructed lie. On the 4th day, a switch flipped. The grief, which had been a heavy, suffocating blanket, ignited into a cold, focused fury. I wouldn't be his victim. I wouldn't be the pathetic wife he'd left behind. He had taken my money, but he had forfeited his right to everything else. My first stop was the law office of Eleanor Vance. Her office was all sharp angles and modern furniture, a stark contrast to the cluttered, homey mess my life had become. Eleanor herself was a woman in her 50s with a steel-gray bob and eyes that missed nothing. I sat in the client chair, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, and I told her everything. The $1,000 tip, the empty book, the missing husband, the missing money. I didn't cry. I stated the facts as if I were reciting a grocery list, and the cold precision of my own voice terrified me. Eleanor listened, her expression unchanging. When I finished, she leaned forward. Theft of separate property, abandonment. We have grounds for an immediate divorce and a civil suit for conversion. We'll freeze any joint assets he hasn't already drained. Do you know where he is? I shook my head. With her, I assume. I don't care where he is, I just want him gone. Legally. Consider it done, she said, her tone leaving no room for doubt. As I stood to leave, she added softer, he did you a favor, Megan. Trash has a way of taking itself out. Her words were a catalyst. I drove home, the cold Alaskan air sharp in my lungs, and I went to war with my own life. I started in the bedroom, pulling his suits, his jeans, his ridiculous collection of graphic tees from the closet, and throwing them into a heap in the center of the room. The scent of his cologne on the fabrics made my stomach lurch. This wasn't a sad sorting of relics, this was an exorcism. I moved to the garage, finding a stack of empty cardboard boxes. I packed his life into them with a violent efficiency. His golf clubs, his vinyl records he never listened to, the expensive coffee maker he'd cherished. Every book, every photo, every stray sock was a brick in the prison he had built for me, and I was tearing it down, brick by brick. The rain started as I carried the first box to the driveway, a cold, relentless drizzle that suited my mood perfectly. Bailey whined at the door, confused, but I worked on. Box after box, I piled his existence on the cracked concrete. The physical exertion was a purge. With every lift and throw, I was expelling him from my muscles, from my memory. The rain soaked through my clothes, plastering my hair to my face, mingling with the sweat and the few hot, angry tears that escaped. The final box contained our wedding album. I didn't open it. I just stood there, looking at the white leather cover, now beaded with rain. 11 years. The smiling, hopeful woman on that cover was a stranger. With a final, heaving effort, I threw it onto the pile. It landed with a dull, wet thud. I stood back, chest heaving, surrounded by the waterlogged ruins of my marriage. The pile was a grotesque sculpture, a monument to our failure. A neighbor's curtain twitched, but I didn't care. Let them look. Let them see the carnage. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I went inside to the kitchen and took the last plate from the set we'd received as a wedding gift. It was a simple white ceramic plate. I walked back to the driveway, drew my arm back, and hurled it at the pile. It shattered against a box marked Dan SMISC, the sound a sharp, satisfying crack in the damp air. It wasn't enough. I went back, grabbed another and another. I smashed our wedding china onto his abandoned life, the shards flying like pieces of my own shattered heart. With every crash, I screamed. I screamed for the betrayal. I screamed for the stolen $1,000. I screamed for the wasted years. I screamed until my voice was raw and the last plate was dust. When it was over, I was empty, hollowed out. The rage had burned itself clean. The pile was no longer just his things. It was the physical manifestation of my pain, left out in the rain to rot. I turned my back on it and walked inside. I was shivering, soaked, and utterly spent. But for the first time since I'd found that empty book, I could breathe. The air in the house was different. It was mine. Later, wrapped in a dry blanket, I opened my laptop. The divorce paperwork was a start, but it was a reactive move. I needed to be proactive. I needed to build. A random ad popped up for an online trading platform. "Take control of your financial future," it blared. It felt like a sign, a direct challenge to Daniel's theft. He thought he could take my future, I would build a better one. I signed up for a beginner's course on day trading, using the last of my meager savings to pay for it. It was a reckless, crazy gamble. But so was staying in this house, in this life. As the first video lesson loaded, a man with a calm voice explaining candlestick charts, a tiny, fragile spark of something ignited in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't even hope. It was resolve. The next morning, I looked at the soggy, broken pile in my driveway. I called a junk removal service. Then I put on my old sneakers and went for a run, pushing my body until the burn in my lungs overpowered the ache in my heart. The path to becoming someone new, someone he would never recognize, had begun. And it was paved with broken china and the relentless, pounding rhythm of my own 2 feet. The world shrank to the glow of my laptop screen. The familiar din of the diner was replaced by the silent, frantic dance of numbers and charts. My new universe was a tiny, online trading platform, a digital coliseum where I was both the gladiator and the prey. Aliner's words, "Trash has taken itself out," became a mantra I whispered to myself during the 3 a.m. study sessions, my eyes gritty from caffeine and concentration. The beginner's trading course was a baptism by fire. The terminology was a foreign language, moving averages, RSI, leverage, shorting. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose. For the first 2 weeks, I understood nothing. The feeling of stupidity was a familiar, suffocating blanket. Daniel had always subtly mocked my job. "It's honest work," he'd say, a phrase that dripped with condescension. Now, faced with this intellectual fortress, I heard his ghost laughing, but I had nothing else. Failure wasn't an option, it was a luxury I couldn't afford. So, I fought. I rewatched the video lessons until the instructor's calm voice was etched into my dreams. I filled a legal pad with frantic notes, drawing charts until my hand cramped. I existed on a diet of instant coffee and a simmering, focused rage that was my only source of fuel. Bailey was my sole companion. He'd lie at my feet, a warm, breathing rug, his head occasionally tilting as I muttered curses at a crashing stock or pumped a silent fist at a successful, tiny trade. I started with a microscopic amount of capital, the last dregs of my savings after paying the lawyer. The first trade I ever placed, a simple buy order for a tech stock, made my hands shake so badly I could barely click the mouse. I lost $27.50. It felt like a catastrophe, a confirmation of my own inadequacy. I cried hot, shameful tears of frustration onto my keyboard, but the next day I went back, and the next. I began to see patterns in the chaos. The market, I realized, wasn't just numbers. It was pure, unadulterated emotion, greed and fear, quantified in a candlestick chart. It was a language I was starting to understand because I was now a creature of those 2 emotions myself. My own greed was for a future. My own fear was of ending up broken and defeated. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday, 6 weeks in. I'd been tracking a volatile cryptocurrency, watching it bounce between a defined support and resistance level. It was a roller coaster, but a predictable one. My heart hammered against my ribs as it dipped to its support line for the 3rd time. This was it. The theory, the practice. I used the last of my meager capital to buy in. For 48 agonizing hours, I barely slept, watching the line wiggle and dance. Then, a piece of positive news hit the wires, and the line didn't just rise, it shot up like a rocket. I sold at the peak of the spike. The profit was $1,150. I stared at the number on the screen, disbelief freezing me in place. $1,150. More than the 1,000 he stole, more than 2 weeks of wages at the diner. It wasn't just money, it was vindication. It was a message from the universe, from my own stubborn will, that I was not the person he had left behind. A sob escaped me, but this time it was a sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. I had done it. I had taken the very instrument of my betrayal, the concept of money, and I had bent it to my will. From that day, something shifted. The fear didn't vanish, but it was joined by a steely confidence. I was no longer just learning. I was executing. My account, once a pathetic, shrinking puddle, began to grow. It became a snowball rolling downhill, gathering mass and momentum. I developed a sixth sense for the market's mood swings. My strategy was cautious, relentless, built on the ashes of my own impulsiveness. I never risked more than I could afford to lose, because I knew intimately what it felt like to have everything taken away. During this time, the legal machinery ground on. Eleanor called with updates. They had found Daniel. He and his colleague had blown through the $1,000 on a weekend trip to Seattle and were living in a shabby apartment there. He'd contested the divorce, of course, claiming I was unreasonable. He didn't know about the trading. He still thought of me as Megan the waitress. The court date was a blur. I wore a simple, severe black dress I'd bought with my trading profits. Daniel looked older, diminished. His new girlfriend wasn't there. He avoided my eyes the entire time. When the judge finalized the divorce and awarded me a judgment for the stolen $1,000 plus legal fees, based on the clear evidence of the bank records and the timing, there was no sense of victory. Just a cold, final click like a lock sliding shut. The house was mine, free and clear. He was ordered to pay me back, a hollow decree we both knew was meaningless. I walked out of the courthouse into the weak Alaskan sun. Daniel scurried away without a backward glance. I stood on the steps, the divorce decree in my hand, and felt nothing. The war was over. I had won. But the battlefield was scarred and silent. That night, back in the now spotless house that held only my echo, I realized I couldn't stay. Every corner was a museum of a life I no longer lived. The house was the final box I needed to empty. I listed it the following week. It sold in a day, for more than I'd expected. The profit, combined with my growing trading account, was a sum of money that would have been unimaginable to me a year ago. On the day of the closing, I walked through the empty rooms one last time. I stopped in the hallway where I'd collapsed on Christmas morning. The ghost was gone. I felt only a mild, distant pity for the woman who had cried there. She was someone I used to know. With the money from the house sale, I did something audacious. I bought a large, raw plot of land on the outskirts of a more prosperous town. It had a view of the mountains that stole your breath. My plan was no longer just about survival. It was about empire. I would build a large, beautiful, modern house, designed not for a family, but as a premium rental property, a luxury escape for tourists. It would be stable, tangible income, an anchor for the volatile, digital money I made on the screens. It was the opposite of everything my life had been, planned, secure, and entirely, unquestionably mine. As I stood on my empty land, the wind whipping my hair, the blueprints for the new house flapping in my hand, I felt a sensation I hadn't felt in over a year. The quiet, steady hum of possibility. The ashes had cooled. And from them, I was building something unshakable. The blueprints for the house were not just drawings, they were a rebellion. Each line was a defiance of the cramped, predictable life I'd left behind. The land I'd bought was a raw, untamed canvas of earth and sky, a place where the wind sang a different tune, one of possibility, not of loss. Standing there, with the plans flapping in my hands like a victorious flag, I felt the first genuine thrill since the world had collapsed. This wasn't just an investment. It was an exorcism in concrete and glass. But the euphoria of acquisition was quickly replaced by the grueling reality of creation. The building process was a war of attrition against the elements, against delays, and against my own naivety. I was no longer just a trader staring at screens. I was a project manager, a negotiator, a woman in a hard hat telling burly contractors where to pour the foundation. They were skeptical at first, this woman who had appeared from nowhere with a roll of cash and a fierce look in her eyes. I saw the doubt in their glances when I questioned a materials estimate or insisted on a higher grade insulation. But I learned fast. I spent my nights studying architectural diagrams and building codes, just as I had studied candlestick charts. My trading profits fed the endless, hungry maw of construction costs. It was a high-wire act, and the fear of falling was a constant, icy companion. It was during a particularly stressful week, when a shipment of windows was delayed and the first snow threatened to halt work, that I hit a wall. The pressure was a physical weight on my chest, a tightness that made it hard to breathe. The controlled, analytical focus I used for trading was useless against this visceral, bodily anxiety. I was building a fortress for my future, but my own body was becoming a prison of stress. Bailey, ever perceptive, nudged my hand with his wet nose, his big, worried eyes fixed on me. I needed an outlet, something physical, something that would force the panic out through my pores. The next morning, I walked into a gym called Iron Haven. It was a far cry from the sterile, pastel-colored fitness centers I'd vaguely imagined. It was a warehouse of grit and grind, filled with the clang of weights and the grunts of effort. The air smelled of sweat and determination. I felt immediately out of place in my old sneakers, my body soft from months of sitting and stressing. And then I saw him. He was across the room, spotting a man bench pressing what looked like an impossible weight. He wasn't overly tall, but he was built with a compact, powerful grace. He wore a simple gray t-shirt stretched tight over shoulders that seemed to carry no burden at all. His focus was entirely on the lifter, his hands poised, ready to assist. But it was his face that held my gaze. He had kind eyes, the kind that crinkled at the corners, and a calm, reassuring presence that cut through the room's chaotic energy. When the set was done, he clapped the man on the shoulder with an easy smile, and I heard a snippet of their conversation. "No pain, no gain," the lifter groaned, rubbing his chest. The trainer's smile widened. "Yeah, but remember what we said. Pain is weakness leaving the body. And also, according to Roadhouse, it's a good reminder you're still alive." He'd quoted a bad 80s movie. A line so cheesy it was charming. It was so disarming, so utterly out of place in this temple of seriousness, that I let out a small, unexpected laugh. His eyes flicked to me, as if hearing the soft sound over the noise. He gave me a brief, professional nod before turning back to his client. My heart did a stupid little flutter. I quickly looked away, my face heating. I signed up for a session with him that day. His name was Alex. His approach was not what I expected. He didn't bark orders or try to impress me with jargon. He asked questions. What were my goals? Not just physically, but mentally. I found myself, to my own astonishment, telling him. Not about Daniel, not about the betrayal, but about the pressure. The constant, grinding need to be strong, to be perfect, to not fail. He listened, truly listened. "So," he said, his voice calm and steady, "we're not here to punish your body for feeling stress. We're here to teach it how to be strong enough to carry that stress, to make your container bigger." His words were a revelation. My first session was a humbling experience of how weak I truly was. My muscles trembled, my form was abysmal. But Alex was endlessly patient. He corrected my posture with hands that were both firm and gentle. He didn't push me to collapse. He guided me to my edge and held me there. "You can do one more," he'd say, and somehow I always could. After the session, drenched in sweat and feeling utterly spent, I felt something I hadn't in a year. A clean, physical exhaustion that washed away the mental static. The tightness in my chest was gone. As I was leaving, Alex was at the front desk, filling out a chart. "Good work today, Megan," he said without looking up. "Seriously. First day is always the hardest." "Thanks," I managed, my voice breathy. "Your method is different." He looked up and grinned, and the crinkles around his eyes deepened. "It's not brain surgery. It's just showing people that they're capable of more than they think. See you next time." Driving home, the memory of that grin stayed with me. It was a spark of human warmth in the cold, focused existence I had built for myself. A dangerous spark. I couldn't afford distractions. My life was about the blueprints, the charts, the numbers. It was about building walls, not knocking them down. Yet that evening, as I reviewed the day's construction reports, my mind kept drifting back to the gym. The smell of sweat, the clang of iron, and the sound of a bad 80s movie, quote delivered with utter sincerity. I looked at the architectural renderings of my modern, sleek rental house. It was a masterpiece of isolation, a monument to self-reliance. And for the first time, the thought of living in it, of being entirely alone in that beautiful, empty space, sent a shiver of loneliness through me that was far colder than any Alaskan wind. The foundations of the house were being poured with concrete. The foundations of my new self were being forged in iron and sweat. And now, a new, unpredictable variable had been introduced. a man with kind eyes and a memorably bad taste in movies. The project was getting complicated. The rhythm of my life became a trinity of purpose. The sharp, digital focus of the trading screens, the gritty, tangible progress of the construction site, and the sacred, sweat-soaked hours at Iron Haven. Alex was becoming the steady drumbeat to this new symphony. Our sessions were no longer just about fitness. They were a weekly lesson in rebuilding my trust in another human being. He never asked about my past. Instead, he asked about my present. "How's the project going?" He'd ask while I struggled through a set of deadlifts, his voice a calm anchor. I found myself telling him about the delayed window shipment, the frustration with the plumber, the small victory of seeing the roof go on. He listened, not as a therapist, but as a partner in the struggle of building something from nothing. He'd share stories of his own: the client who cried after doing her first unassisted pull-up, the frustration of starting his own small business, the simple joy of a perfectly grilled steak. It was after a particularly grueling session, where he'd pushed me to hold a plank for what felt like an eternity, that he mentioned the hiking trail. "You're strong enough now," he said, wiping his brow. "Not just in here," he gestured around the gym, "but out there. There's a trail up to Bear Point. The map they give you is garbage, folds all wrong, but the view, it's worth the confusion." My first instinct was to say no, a hike. Together, outside the safe, defined boundaries of the gym, it felt like a date, and the very concept sent a jolt of panic through my system. Dating was for women with unbroken hearts, for lives that weren't still under construction. But I looked at him, at the sincere, open offer in his face, and I heard myself say, "When?" So, on a crisp Saturday morning, with the sky a brilliant, untroubled blue, I found myself in a parking lot at the base of a mountain, clutching the poorly folded, practically useless map he'd warned me about. Alex was already there, leaning against his truck, a backpack at his feet. He looked different in hiking clothes, softer, more approachable. The sight of him sent that now familiar, stupid flutter through my chest. "The infamous map," I said, holding it up. He grinned. "A classic. It builds character. Ready to get lost?" The first mile was a gentle incline through a dense canopy of spruce trees. The air was cold and clean, scented of pine and damp earth. We walked in a comfortable silence, broken only by the crunch of our boots on the trail and the distant call of a raven. It was a different kind of exertion than the gym, a sustained, meditative burn. I was acutely aware of his presence beside me, the rhythm of his breathing matching my own. As promised, the map was a liar. The trail forked in places the paper didn't show. Streams crossed our path where none were indicated. "See," Alex said, peering over my shoulder as I futilely tried to refold the map. "It's not about following the lines, it's about reading the land. Look." He pointed to a subtle cairn of stones left by a previous hiker. "That's our sign. The map says go left, the mountain says go right." We went right, and he was correct. The path opened up onto a ridge with a breathtaking view of the valley below. For a moment, we just stood there, side by side, breathing in the immense silence. The world felt vast and full of promise. My problems, the lawsuits, the construction delays, the ghost of Daniel, shrank to microscopic proportions. "It's like the market," I found myself saying, the words surprising me. "The charts give you a theory, a map, but the real money is made in reading the subtle shifts, the emotions the map can't show." He looked at me, his eyes curious. "You trade?" It was the first big piece of my new life I'd voluntarily offered. "Yeah, I do." I didn't elaborate, and he didn't press. He just nodded as if it made perfect sense. The trail got steeper, more challenging. At one point, we had to scramble up a rocky outcrop. He went first, then turned and offered me his hand. It was a simple, practical gesture, but my hand hesitated. Trusting him to spot me with a barbell was one thing. Trusting him to pull me up a mountain was another. I looked at his outstretched hand, then into his eyes. There was no pressure there, only quiet assurance. I took it. His grip was firm and warm, grounding me as I found my footing. The contact sent a current through me, a vivid, startling reminder of human touch that wasn't transactional or tainted by betrayal. It was just help. It was just kindness. We reached the summit as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The world was laid out at our feet, a panoramic masterpiece of Alaskan wilderness. We sat on a flat rock, sharing a water bottle and a bag of trail mix from his backpack. We didn't speak much. The view did all the talking. But then, in the comfortable quiet, he said something that shattered the last of my defenses. You know, the first time I saw you at the gym, you had this look in your eyes, like you were standing in the ruins of your own life and you were deciding, brick by brick, what to rebuild. Tears, hot and sudden, pricked my eyes. I looked away, blinking rapidly. He saw me. Not Megan the waitress, not Megan the victim, not even Megan the successful trader. He saw the architect in the rubble. I whispered, my voice thick. I know, he said softly. I've been there. He didn't try to comfort me or fill the silence. He just sat with me in the truth of my pain as the sun dipped below the horizon. On the hike down, in the growing twilight, he held my hand again, not to pull me up, but just to hold it. The poorly folded map was forgotten in my pocket. We didn't need it anymore. We had found our own way. That night, back in my temporary apartment, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. The ghost of Daniel had been chased away, not by rage, but by the simple, profound power of being seen. The house I was building had walls and a roof. But on that mountain, with Alex's hand in mine, I felt the first real foundation of my new life settle into place, solid and unshakable. The map had been wrong, but the destination was right. The modern house was complete. It stood on the land, a stark, beautiful sculpture of glass, steel, and reclaimed wood against the rugged Alaskan backdrop. It was everything I had envisioned, a testament to precision, a machine for living, and a perfect, passive income stream. The first professional photos were taken, the listing went live on all the premium rental platforms, and within hours, the inquiries started flooding in. I felt a quiet, powerful satisfaction. I had taken the ashes of my old life and built a palace from them. I was at Alex's apartment, a cozy, lived-in space that smelled of books and roasted coffee, when the notification came. We were cooking dinner together, a simple pasta dish that felt more intimate than any fancy restaurant. He was recounting a story about a client who tried to lift a weight far beyond his capacity, and I was laughing, a real, unforced laugh that felt like sunshine in my chest. My phone buzzed on the counter, an alert from the rental properties management system, a new booking application. I wiped my hands on a towel, still smiling, and opened the email. The name on the application hit me with the force of a physical blow. Daniel St. James. The world screeched to a halt. The sound of sizzling garlic from the stove, Alex's voice, the gentle music playing in the background, it all faded into a high-pitched whine. My vision tunneled, focused on that name, my former name, the name I hadn't spoken or written in over 2 years. Megan, Alex's voice was distant, concerned. You okay? You're white as a sheet. I couldn't speak. I thrust the phone toward him, my hand trembling. He took it, his eyes scanning the screen. His expression shifted from confusion to a dark, protective understanding. He knew the name. I'd told him enough. Is this? He asked quietly. I nodded, my throat tight. The details of the application burned into my brain. A 1-month rental, 2 guests, the purpose of the visit, a fresh start. The bitter irony was a taste of vomit in the back of my throat. A fresh start. In my house, the house I built with the money I made after he stole from me and left me for dead. He can't, Alex said, his voice firm, final. Just reject it. I'll do it for you. He reached for the phone. Wait. The word was a croak. I walked to the large window in Alex's living room, staring out at the twilight, my arms wrapped tightly around myself. A storm of emotions warred inside me. White-hot rage was the first, a familiar fire. How dare he even look at my listing, let alone apply to live in the monument to my survival? But then, a more insidious feeling crept in. Pity. The application had been sparse, but the subtext was screaming. A 1-month rental, not a vacation. A fresh start? It sounded desperate. The image of him in the courtroom, diminished and shabby, resurfaced. Had his life with the colleague crumbled? Was he back in Alaska, broke and homeless, and the only place he could think to go was a town connected to his ex-wife? Megan, Alex said, coming to stand behind me. He didn't touch me, just offered his presence. You don't owe him anything. You owe yourself peace. That house, it's your sanctuary. Don't let his shadow touch it. He was right. Every logical, self-preserving bone in my body screamed to hit reject. To erase him from my reality once and for all. But the ghost of the woman I used to be, the one who had loved him for 11 years, whispered something else. It whispered about closure, about looking the past in the eye, not from a position of victimhood, but from the unassailable peak I now stood upon. To see him, not with rage, but with the cold, clear eyes of a landlord assessing a tenant, it would be the ultimate power move, to have him pay me to live in the life he threw away. "I'm going to accept it," I heard myself say. The words hung in the air, shocking even me. Alex was silent for a long moment. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice low and strained. "Why put yourself through that?" I turned to face him. "Because I'm not afraid of him anymore, Alex. That house is my armor. I want him to see it. I want him to walk through those rooms and understand exactly what he lost. I want him to pay me for the privilege of his own humiliation." It was a dangerous, arrogant gambit. I saw the worry in Alex's eyes, but he also saw the steel in mine. He didn't try to stop me, he simply nodded. "Okay, then I'm with you." I drafted the approval email myself. It was perfectly professional, devoid of any emotion. I listed the check-in procedures, the Wi-Fi password, the rules about trash disposal. I was the disembodied voice of a corporation, the faceless landlord. I signed it simply, the management. Let him wonder. Let him assume it was some anonymous property company. The day he was due to arrive, I drove to the house. I didn't go inside. I parked my new car, a sleek, powerful SUV I'd bought with my trading profits, a little way down the road, hidden by a copse of trees. I needed to see it. I needed this final, visual confirmation of my victory. Right on time, a beat-up, dusty sedan I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. The driver's door opened and he got out. Daniel. He looked older than he had any right to. His shoulders were slumped. He was alone. He stood there for a long time, just staring up at the house, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a thin jacket. He looked small and pathetic against the grandeur of the structure. There was no triumph in me as I watched him. No schadenfreude, just a vast, hollow emptiness. This was the man who had shattered me. This shivering, lonely figure. He fumbled with the keypad lock, finally got the door open, and disappeared inside. I sat in my car for another 10 minutes, watching the light come on in the great room. He was in my house. The ghost was at the feast. But as I sat there, a profound realization settled over me. I felt nothing. No anger, no pain. Not even pity. He was just a man in a house. A tenant. A line item on a spreadsheet. The final chain that had bound me to him, the chain of intense emotion, had simply fallen away, rusted to dust by time and my own relentless growth. I had thought this would be about power, about showing him what he lost. But as I started the car and drove away, heading back to Alex, to my real life, I understood the truth. It was never about him. It was about me. And I was finally, completely free. The silence in Alex's apartment was a physical presence, thick and heavy. I had returned from my vigil at the house. The image of Daniel's slumped silhouette burned into my mind. Alex didn't bombard me with questions. He simply poured me a glass of wine, guided me to the sofa, and sat beside me, his presence a steady, warm rock in the swirling, cold waters of my past. "Well," he finally asked, his voice soft. "He's there," I said, the words tasting foreign. He looked small. I expected to feel a torrent of emotion, victory, rage, vindication. Instead, I felt a profound, unnerving emptiness. It was as if I'd spent years building a fortress to withstand a siege, only to look out and see the opposing army had disbanded, leaving behind a single, tired soldier who didn't even remember the war. For the next week, a strange duality defined my existence. By day, I was more successful than I had ever been. My trading account swelled. The first glowing 5-star review for the rental property came in from a different, anonymous guest. Alex and I fell into an easy, domestic rhythm. We trained, we cooked, we hiked, we talked for hours. He was my present, my future, solid and real. But Daniel was a ghost haunting the periphery of my new life. Not a menacing ghost, but a pathetic one. I found myself checking the property management app more than necessary. He was a model tenant. Quiet, no complaints. The utilities were paid on time. He was following all the rules laid out by the management. This passive, obedient existence from the man who had once been the epicenter of my emotional universe was, in its own way, more unsettling than if he'd trashed the place. The contract between us was a digital document, a set of rules governing the lease. But the unspoken contract between our past and present was what truly held me captive. I had invited this. I had wanted to see him humbled. But now that I had it, the victory felt hollow, even corrosive. It was keeping a thread, however thin, connecting me to a version of myself I had worked tirelessly to bury. One evening, 10 days after he'd moved in, I was at Alex's, trying to focus on a movie. It was, of course, a bad 80s action film. Alex was reciting the lines with gusto, trying to make me laugh. But my mind was elsewhere, pulled back to that modern house on the hill. "He's paying me rent," I blurted out, pausing the movie. Alex muted the TV and turned to me, giving me his full attention. That was the point, wasn't it? Was it? I asked, the question genuine. I thought it was, but it feels dirty. It feels like I'm still letting him dictate the terms of my life, just from a position of power instead of weakness. I'm still reacting to him. My energy, my thoughts, he's still taking them, Alex, just in a different currency. The realization was a cold splash of water. My grand power move had been a trap of my own making. I had become the warden of my own prison, and he was the inmate whose passive existence still required my surveillance. Alex listened, his gaze thoughtful. "So what do you want to do?" "I want him gone," I whispered, and this time it wasn't spoken from a place of anger, but from a deep, weary need for finality. Not because I hate him, but because I no longer have any room for him in my life, not even as a tenant. I don't want his money. I don't want to know he's in a space I created for my own freedom. "Then evict him," Alex said simply. "You're the landlord. Break the contract." It sounded so clinical, so simple, but it was the necessary surgery to cut out the last remaining cyst of the past. I couldn't heal fully with him still physically residing in a symbol of my rebirth. That night, I drafted a new email. It was not from the management. It was from me. "Daniel, this is Megan. I am the owner of the property you are currently renting. I am terminating your rental agreement, effective immediately. I am invoking the 24-hour cancellation clause in the contract for the convenience of the owner. You will not be charged any penalties. Your full deposit and any prepaid rent will be refunded to you within the hour. Please vacate the premises by 10 a.m. tomorrow. The key code will be disabled at that time. This is not a negotiation." Megan, there was no explanation, no justification, no mention of the past. It was a statement of fact, delivered from a position of absolute, unassailable authority. I was not doing this to him. I was doing it for me. I hit send. The whoosh of the email leaving my inbox felt like the final, closing note of a symphony that had been playing for 2 years. I then initiated the refunds, watching the digital transaction complete in seconds. I was paying for his departure, and it was the best money I had ever spent. I didn't wait to see if he would reply. I blocked his email address. I then went into the property management system and permanently blacklisted his name and email from any future bookings. The next morning at 10:05 a.m., I received an automated notification that the front door lock had been manually locked for the final time. A minute later, the security camera feed showed the beat-up sedan pulling out of the driveway and disappearing down the road. He was gone. I stood in my own living room, the morning sun streaming through the windows, and felt the final piece of my soul click back into place. The unspoken contract was null and void. The ledger was settled. The ghost had been evicted, not with a scream, but with a silent, decisive click of a mouse. The house on the hill was mine again, truly mine. And for the first time, so was I. The space left by Daniel's departure was not an emptiness. It was a vacuum quickly filled by a profound and quiet peace. The house on the hill was no longer a symbol of my defiance, but simply a successful asset. The ghost was gone, and with it, the last lingering chill in my bones. My life with Alex blossomed, unfettered by the shadows of the past. We were no longer building separate futures that happened to intersect. We were weaving our lives together, thread by strong, colorful thread. Our shared passion for the outdoors became the cornerstone of our relationship. Weekend hikes with a poorly folded map were our specialty, our laughter echoing through the valleys as we inevitably took a wrong turn, discovering hidden waterfalls or secluded meadows we never would have found otherwise. It was during one of these adventures, as we sat by a glacial lake sharing a sandwich, that the shift happened. The conversation turned from the present to the future, not in an abstract way, but in a tangible, planning one. This, Alex said, his arm sweeping across the vista of towering peaks reflected in the turquoise water. This is what I want for my kids. All of this. The space. The quiet strength of it. The word kids hung in the clean, cold air. It was a word that had been surgically removed from my vocabulary years ago. With Daniel, the subject had been a source of quiet tension, a dream perpetually deferred until some mythical, right time that never came. Then, after the betrayal, it became an impossibility, a part of the life that had been stolen. But hearing it from Alex here, in this place of such staggering beauty and peace, it didn't feel like a reopening of an old wound. It felt like the planting of a new seed. "Kids?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. He looked at me, his eyes clear and earnest. "Yeah, a whole little tribe of mini hikers. If that's something you could ever see for yourself." I didn't answer immediately. I looked out at the landscape, at the raw, powerful, enduring beauty of it. I thought about the house I had built, not just the physical one on the hill, but the internal one, strong, resilient, and finally, truly secure. I thought about the love I had with Alex, a love that felt less like a frantic flame and more like the deep, steady heat of the earth itself. For the first time, the idea of creating a new life within that security didn't feel terrifying. It felt like the most natural, logical progression in the world. "I can see it," I whispered, turning to him. The joy that illuminated his face was brighter than the Alaskan sun. That night, the conversation continued, curled up on the sofa with Bailey snoring at our feet. It was no longer a question of if, but of how. We talked about timelines, about logistics. The idea of a large, traditional wedding held little appeal for either of us. We wanted something that was us. Simple, real, surrounded by a handful of true friends and the majestic wilderness we both loved. A wedding wasn't the goal. The life after was. A few weeks later, a familiar, dull ache in my lower back and a strange, fluttering sense of anticipation made me stop on my way home from the grocery store. I stood in the brightly lit aisle of a pharmacy, staring at a wall of pregnancy tests. The array of boxes felt like a portal to another dimension. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of hope and pure, unadulterated fear. I bought a 2-pack. At home, the silence in the bathroom was deafening. The only sound was the rustle of the cardboard box and the thudding of my own heart. I followed the instructions with the meticulous focus I usually reserved for analyzing a complex trading chart. Then, I set the stick on the edge of the sink and turned away, forcing myself not to watch the slow creep of the liquid. I counted to 60 in my head, each number a lifetime. When I turned back, my breath caught in my throat. A single, bold, unmistakably blue line. A positive. The world didn't tilt. It didn't shatter. It simply crystallized. Everything became sharp, clear, and breathtakingly real. I placed a hand on my still flat stomach, a gesture both instinctual and utterly new. A laugh bubbled up from a place deep inside me I didn't know existed, a sound of pure, untarnished joy, followed immediately by a wave of tears that were not of sadness, but of overwhelming, terrifying, magnificent wonder. I walked out of the bathroom, the test clutched in my trembling hand. Alex was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. He looked up and his smile faded as he saw my face, streaked with tears. "Meg, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice instantly laced with concern, setting the knife down. I couldn't speak. I just held out the plastic stick. He took it, his eyes dropping to the single blue line. His brow furrowed in confusion for a split second, then his face went utterly still. Understanding dawned, slow and then all at once. His eyes, wide and disbelieving, snapped up to meet mine. "Is this?" he breathed, the words barely a whisper. I nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "It's a yes." The sound he made was a cross between a sob and a laugh. He dropped the test on the counter, crossed the room in 2 strides, and swept me into his arms, lifting me off the ground in a crushing, euphoric embrace. He was laughing, crying, whispering my name over and over into my hair. "A baby," he finally said, setting me down but keeping his hands firmly on my shoulders, his gaze locked on mine. "We're having a baby." In that moment, looking into the eyes of the man I loved, the man who knew every line from bad 80s movies and how to fix a flat tire on a highway, the man who had held my hand while I evicted my past, I knew this was the true upgrade. Not the money, not the house. This. This was the final, glorious rewrite of my story. The blue line wasn't just a positive test, it was the first sentence of a brand new chapter. The scent of rain-washed earth and blooming fireweed filled the air, a perfume more luxurious than anything from a bottle. We stood on the crest of a hill, the one we'd hiked to on that first, map-fumbling date. It was our place. And now it was our chapel. The aisle was a path of wild grass, and our congregation consisted of Liam, Alex's best friend and business partner, Sarah, my one steadfast friend from the diner days who'd never judged me, and Bailey, wearing a lopsided bandana that served as a boutonniere. There was no minister. We had written our own vows, and we spoke them to each other under the vast, endless Alaskan sky, with Liam officiating as we'd asked him to. I wore a simple, elegant ivory sheath dress, not a white gown. White felt like a lie. Ivory felt like a testament, a color that acknowledged the past but had been warmed and transformed by it. Alex stood before me, his hands holding mine, his eyes glistening with an emotion so pure it made my heart ache. My own small baby bump was a subtle curve beneath the fabric of my dress, a secret promise already being fulfilled. "Megan," he began, his voice steady and clear, carrying on the wind. "I vow to be your spotter, in the gym and in life. To always have my hands ready to catch you when you push yourself too far, and to always cheer the loudest when you lift more than you thought you could. I vow to be the calm in your storm, the steady hand on the poorly folded map, and the person who will always know how you take your coffee." He smiled, a soft, private smile. "And I vow to our daughter that I will be the father who shows her every day what it means to respect and adore the incredible woman her mother is." Tears streamed down my face, but they were tears of light, not of sorrow. I took a shaky breath, squeezing his hands. "Alex," I started, my voice trembling but gaining strength with every word. "I vow to bring my strength to your calm, my fire to your earth. I vow to build a life with you that is as real and as sturdy as the house I built for myself, but infinitely warmer and filled with more laughter. I vow to always be honest, to always fight fair, and to always save you the last piece of bacon." A soft chuckle rippled through our tiny group. "And I vow to our daughter," I continued, my hand moving instinctively to my stomach, "that I will show her what it means to rise from the ashes, to choose joy over bitterness, and to never, ever settle for anything less than a love that feels like coming home." There were no rings. Instead, Alex had given me a simple, stunning sapphire necklace, the color of the Alaskan twilight, and I had given him a new, vintage-style compass, engraved with the coordinates of this very hill. Liam pronounced us partners for life. And as Alex leaned in to kiss me, his lips warm and sure against mine, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing us in a golden, cinematic light. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. We were two broken people who had found their missing pieces in each other, and we were building a mosaic more beautiful than any pristine picture could ever be. The reception was a bonfire back at our house, with grilled fish, stories, and a lot of bad 80s music played from a portable speaker. As the northern lights began to dance in the sky, a green and purple veil of celestial magic, Alex pulled me close. "Think she'll like the lights?" he whispered, his hand resting on my belly. "I think she already does," I murmured, leaning into him, watching the sky perform just for us. This was the family I had chosen. This was the life I had built, and it was only just beginning. The pain was a living thing, a tidal wave of pressure and fire that crashed over me, receded, and then gathered itself for the next assault. It was nothing like I had imagined. It was more. More primal, more all-consuming, more terrifyingly powerful. In the sterile, bright delivery room, with Alex a solid, sweating anchor on one side and a relentlessly cheerful nurse on the other, I lost all sense of the woman I had become. The successful trader, the property owner, the resilient survivor, they all vanished, stripped away by this most ancient and demanding of processes. I was just a body, a vessel, a creature of pure instinct and pain. "You're doing amazing, Megan. You're so strong," Alex whispered, his voice hoarse, his hand crushing mine. He had been reciting lines from Roadhouse an hour ago, trying to make me laugh between contractions. Now there was no laughter, only a shared, breathless intensity. Another contraction seized me, a vice tightening deep inside, stealing my air, my thoughts, my very sense of self. A guttural groan tore from my throat. "I can't," I gasped, the words shredded. I can't do this. It was in that moment of utter surrender, on the precipice of what felt like annihilation, that a memory surfaced, not of Daniel, but of the feeling of his betrayal. The shocking, specific cold of the empty book on Christmas morning, the hollow ache of the abandoned house. That pain had felt like an ending. This pain, this tearing, rending, overwhelming agony, this was a beginning. It was the price of admission to a new world. "You are doing it," Alex said, his face inches from mine, his eyes blazing with a fierce, unwavering faith. "You're the strongest person I know. Bring our girl home, Meg." Push. His words were a lifeline. I clung to them. I pushed. I pushed with the same fury I'd used to box up Daniel's life and leave it in the rain. I pushed with the same focused determination I'd used to decode the trading charts. I pushed with all the love I had for the man holding my hand, for the future we had built, for the little life fighting her way into the world. It was a purge of every last remnant of the past, a final, violent expulsion of the old to make room for the new. There was a final, searing, impossible stretch, a sound from the doctor I couldn't decipher, and then silence. A sudden, profound, and terrifying silence. The pressure was gone. The pain vanished, replaced by a dizzying, hollow emptiness. My heart stopped, the world froze. That 1 second of silence stretched into an eternity of dread. "No, no, please no," and then a sound, a thin, indignant, furious wail. It pierced the silence, a sharp, beautiful, life-affirming cry. It was the most glorious sound I had ever heard. They placed her on my chest, a tiny, writhing, purple and pink creature, slick and perfect. Her cries softened into hiccuping gulps as her skin met mine. Her head was covered in a shock of dark hair, her eyes were squeezed shut, her miniature fists clenched and waving. I looked down at this squalling, furious, miraculous being, and a love so vast, so fierce, so terrifyingly absolute exploded inside me that I could only sob. "Aurora," Alex choked out, his own tears falling onto my hair as he leaned over us, one trembling hand stroking our daughter's back. "Our Dawn." I had chosen the name weeks ago, Aurora, for the northern lights that had danced at our wedding, for the new dawn she represented in my life, a dawn I had fought for, bled for, and built for myself. I looked from her perfect, tiny face to Alex's overwhelmed, joyous one. This was the upgrade, not the financial security, not the property portfolio. This raw, messy, profound connection, this complete and total rewriting of my heart's purpose. The nurse eventually took her to be weighed and measured. Alex followed, his gaze glued to his daughter. I lay back, spent, trembling, a different person than the one who had walked into this room hours ago. The physical pain was already fading into a dull, manageable ache, but the emotional seismic shift was permanent. My phone, on the bedside table, buzzed. A notification from my trading app. A significant, profitable trade had just closed automatically. I looked at the screen, at the string of numbers that would have once sent a thrill of vindication through me. Now it was just numbers. The real fortune was swaddled in a blanket across the room, being cradled by her father. Alex brought her back to me, placing her carefully in my arms. She was asleep now, her breath soft and even her little rosebud mouth pursed. I traced the impossibly soft skin of her cheek with my finger. "He never knew," I said softly, not looking at Alex. "Knew what?" he asked, his voice gentle. "What he was throwing away," I whispered. "He thought he was just leaving a waitress in a quiet house. He had no idea he was abandoning this." I looked up at Alex, my eyes clear. "And I would go through every second of the hell he put me through 1,000 times over, if it was the only path that led me here. To her. To you." It was the final, absolute truth. The betrayal was no longer a wound. It was the scar that proved my survival, the contrast that made this joy so brilliantly bright. In the quiet of the hospital room, with my husband's hand on my shoulder and my daughter's heart beating against mine, I finally, truly, arrived home. The engine of the luxury SUV was a whisper, a far cry from the rattling groan of my old car. I pulled into the driveway of our new home, not a rental property, not a monument, but our home. Alex had led the construction this time, and it showed in the warm, welcoming porch light, the sturdy, custom-built swing, and the sprawling garden plot waiting for spring. It was a house built for living, for growing, for getting messy. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and the faint, sweet scent of baby. Alex was in the living room, on a thick, soft rug, lying on his stomach making ridiculous faces at Aurora. Our daughter, now 6 months old, was propped up on her elbows, chubby legs kicking with delight. A gummy smile stretched across her face as she squealed at her father's antics. Bailey, now gray-muzzled but still devoted, lay nearby, his tail thumping a steady rhythm on the floor. This was the picture. This was the final, completed masterpiece my life had been painstakingly, brutally, beautifully leading toward. She almost rolled over, Alex said, looking up as I walked in, his eyes crinkling with that same easy smile that had disarmed me in the gym a lifetime ago. She says that every time, I laughed, dropping my bag and kneeling beside them. I leaned down and blew a raspberry on Aurora's belly, sending her into a new paroxysm of giggles. The sound was pure, undiluted magic. Later, after Aurora was asleep in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of absolute security, Alex and I sat on the sofa with 2 glasses of wine. The silence was comfortable, filled with the unspoken language of 2 people who have built something together. "I have something for you," he said, his tone casual but his eyes twinkling. He reached behind a cushion and pulled out a small, elegantly wrapped box. "It's not an anniversary, it's not a birthday, it's just a Tuesday." I raised an eyebrow, smiling. "My favorite kind of occasion." I untied the ribbon and opened the box. Nestled inside wasn't jewelry. It was a single, sleek, black key fob. I picked it up, confused. We already had both keys to the SUV. "What's this for?" "Turn it over," he said, his grin widening. I flipped the fob. Taped to the back was a tiny, laminated photo, the kind you get from a passport photo booth. It was a picture of the 3 of us, me, Alex, and a beaming Aurora, squeezed together, making silly faces. "It's the key to my heart," Alex said, and then burst out laughing at his own ridiculousness. "No, I'm kidding." That was terrible. "Look out the front window." Puzzled, I got up and walked to the large picture window that looked out onto the driveway. Parked next to my SUV was a car. Not just any car. A sporty, incredibly elegant, deep blue convertible. It looked like freedom and joy sculpted into metal. My hand flew to my mouth. "Alex, what?" "It's yours," he said, coming to stand behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "You built an empire from a $1,000 tip and a broken heart. You evicted your ghosts. You brought our daughter into the world. You deserve something that's just for you, for the joy of it. No practical reason. Just for the wind in your hair." Tears welled in my eyes, but they were the good kind. The kind that come from being seen, from being loved so thoroughly and thoughtfully. He wasn't giving me a car. He was giving me a symbol. A symbol that the struggle was over, that the season of survival had finally, irrevocably, given way to the season of living. The next day, I took the convertible out for a drive alone, with the top down despite the chill. The Alaskan air was sharp and clean, scouring away the last invisible remnants of the past. I drove past the old diner, now under new management. I drove past the street where my old house stood, the one I'd shared with Daniel. I felt nothing but a distant, academic curiosity, like studying a historical site. I drove up to the modern rental property on the hill. It was occupied by a happy-looking family, their rental period paid in full, adding another quiet, stable stream to the life I had built. I ended up at the hiking trail, the one with the poorly folded map. I didn't get out. I just sat in the driver's seat, the engine purring, and looked at the path leading up the mountain. I had climbed my own mountain. It had been steeper, more treacherous, and more painful than any trail on any map, but the view from the summit was infinitely more beautiful. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Alex. A photo of him and Aurora, both making the same cross-eyed face. The caption read, "Hurry home. The tribe misses its chief." I smiled, a full, deep, soul-satisfying smile. I turned the car around and headed home. Not to a house, but to my family. The upgrade was complete. The story of the waitress who was betrayed was over. Now it was the story of Megan, trader, builder, wife, mother. A woman who had walked through fire and emerged, not scarred, but forged into something unbreakable and radiant. And her story, I knew with every fiber of my being, was just beginning.